I kept a sealed envelope for 14 years because I believed unopened paper couldn't change my life. It sat in the back of a kitchen drawer beneath old utility bills, faded warranty cards, and a bent screwdriver I hadn't used since 2011. Every few months I saw the hospital logo in the corner, closed the drawer, and told myself the same lie: if I feel fine today, whatever is inside can wait until tomorrow. Now I am 90 years old, and that envelope weighs more than every box I have carried in my lifetime. Before I tell you what happened when I finally opened it, I want to give you something that took me 7 decades to understand. If you've ever postponed a doctor's appointment because work seemed more important, because money was tight, because you were afraid of bad news, or because you convinced yourself that pain was just part of getting older, stay with me. My mistake wasn't made in one day. It was built one excuse at a time, until excuses became the only thing keeping me alive and eventually the reason I almost wasn't. I know what denial sounds like because I spoke it every morning for years. I repaired roofs until I was 68. I climbed ladders in summer heat that made younger men quit before noon. I carried bundles of shingles heavier than my grandson without asking for help. The men around me admired my toughness. My neighbors called me the strongest old man on the block. What none of them saw was how often I had to stop behind the truck just to catch my breath. And that sealed envelope was waiting for me all along. There wasn't one day when my health disappeared. It leaked away so slowly that I mistook it for ordinary aging. I remember a Tuesday morning in October. I was 76. The air was cold enough that every breath left a white cloud in front of my face as I loaded lumber into the back of my pickup. Halfway through, a sharp pressure settled across my chest. Not pain exactly, more like someone had tied a thick belt around my ribs and pulled it one notch tighter. I leaned against the tailgate for 43 seconds. I counted because counting felt easier than admitting something was wrong. When the pressure eased, I laughed at myself. "You're getting old," I muttered. Then I finished loading the truck. That became my diagnosis for everything. When my knees swelled after work, "You're getting old." When climbing 12 porch steps left me breathing harder than before, "You're getting old." When I began waking at 3 in the morning with a dull ache between my shoulders, "You're getting old." Those 5 words were cheaper than a doctor's appointment. They were also far more expensive. From the outside, I looked dependable. My lawn stayed trimmed. My gutters were clean. I never missed helping a neighbor replace a fence or move heavy furniture. People saw a man who refused to slow down. Inside my own house, the truth looked different. Some evenings I sat in my recliner without turning on the television because lifting my feet onto the footrest felt like too much work. I would wait until the dizziness passed before standing to make dinner. Sometimes I skipped eating altogether because walking to the kitchen seemed exhausting. No one knew. Not because they didn't care. Because I became an expert at hiding the moments between the moments. My daughter once touched my arm after Sunday lunch. "Dad, are you breathing okay?" I smiled before she could worry. "Just getting older." She looked at me for another second, as if she wanted to argue. Then she nodded. I gave her permission to believe my lie. The worst part wasn't ignoring my body. It was how proud I became of ignoring it. Every symptom I endured without complaining felt like proof that I was still the man I'd always been. Every appointment I cancelled felt like another victory over weakness. I wore my neglect like a medal no one had asked me to earn. I didn't realize I was training myself to mistake silence for strength. And somewhere in the back of that kitchen drawer, beneath years of forgotten papers, the envelope waited without saying a word. The envelope arrived on a rainy Thursday when I was 76. I remember because the mail was damp, and I laid every letter across the kitchen table to dry before opening it. Bills. A grocery flyer. A birthday card from my sister. And one white envelope with the hospital's name printed in blue. I had gone through the tests 2 weeks earlier only because my daughter insisted. "Just promise me you'll go," she said. "If everything's fine, I'll stop nagging you." So I went. The nurse drew blood. They ran scans. The doctor told me the results would arrive within 10 days. When the envelope came, I picked it up. Then the phone rang. A customer needed help repairing storm damage before the weekend. I slipped the envelope into the kitchen drawer, grabbed my keys, and left. That evening I told myself I would read it after dinner. I didn't. The next morning became next week. Next week became next month. Then something strange happened. The longer it stayed unopened, the harder it became to touch. By the end of that first year, the envelope wasn't just paper anymore. It had become a question I was afraid to hear answered. So I built my life around avoiding one drawer. Every January, when I cleaned the kitchen, I moved it from one stack of papers to another without breaking the seal. Every April, when I filed my taxes, I saw the corner of the envelope and looked away. Every December, I promised myself, after Christmas. Christmas became another year. At 81, I stopped walking the 2 miles around the neighborhood because my legs felt unusually heavy. I told my friends my knees were bothering me. The truth was that I had to stop twice just to make it around 1 block. At 84, my daughter found unopened appointment reminder cards on the refrigerator. "Dad," she said quietly, "what are you so afraid of?" I answered too quickly. "I'm not afraid." She didn't argue. She only looked at the drawer. For a moment, I thought she knew. But she simply hugged me before leaving. I watched her car disappear down the street, then walked back inside and made myself a cup of coffee instead of opening the envelope. That became my routine whenever guilt knocked. Coffee. Distraction. Tomorrow. At 88, even opening a jar required both hands. At 89, climbing the stairs meant stopping halfway to catch my breath. Still, I never touched the envelope. It waited in silence. More patient than I ever was. I believed I was postponing bad news. I never considered that the real damage had already been done long before I found the courage to break the seal. The envelope found me before I found the courage to face it. It happened on a cold morning 3 weeks after my 90th birthday. A pipe beneath the kitchen sink had started leaking during the night. By the time I noticed, the bottom cabinet was soaked. I pulled everything out onto the floor: old tools, faded instruction manuals, a rusted flashlight that no longer worked, grocery receipts so old the ink had disappeared. Then the drawer jammed. I pulled harder. The wooden runners gave way, and everything spilled across the linoleum. For a moment, I simply stared. There it was. The white envelope. Still sealed. Still carrying my name in handwriting that belonged to a nurse who had probably retired years ago. The paper had turned slightly yellow around the edges. 14 years. I sat down on the kitchen floor because my knees wouldn't hold me. The room was silent except for the slow drip of water under the sink. My hands shook as I turned the envelope over. The seal cracked with almost no effort. I remember thinking how strange that was. 14 years of fear, destroyed by one gentle pull. Inside were several pages. The first line blurred because my eyes filled before I could finish reading. I wiped them and started again. The findings suggest changes that require immediate follow-up. Immediate. The word was 14 years old. Another page recommended additional testing within weeks. A handwritten note from my doctor was clipped to the report. Please don't delay. We have a real chance to treat this if we act early. If we act early. I whispered the words out loud. As if I still can. No one answered. I picked up my phone and called the clinic, even though I already knew the doctor who had written the note was no longer there. A younger physician saw me 2 days later. He read the old report first. Then he looked at the new scans. He took off his glasses and rested them on the desk. I wish we had met 14 years ago, he said softly. Not because he wanted to blame me. Because he wished he could have helped me. I nodded. I know. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. The clock on the wall ticked loudly enough to sound like footsteps leaving a room. When I walked back into my house that afternoon, the kitchen drawer was still lying on the floor where it had broken. I didn't fix it. I left it there for 3 days. Every time I passed it, I looked at that torn envelope and realized something I had spent a lifetime refusing to believe. Bad news doesn't become smaller while it waits. Only your chances do. For years, I believed fear was the enemy. I was wrong. Fear is loud. It pounds on your chest before a doctor's visit. It keeps you awake the night before a test. It makes your palms sweat as you sit in a waiting room. What ruined me was something much quieter. Delay. Delay is fear after it has learned to whisper. It doesn't tell you, don't go. It says, go next month. It doesn't say, ignore the pain. It says, let's see how you feel tomorrow. That is why it is so dangerous. It dresses itself as reason. If there is one thing I can give you from everything I lost, it is this simple rule: never give tomorrow permission to answer a question your body is asking today. I wish someone had said those words to me when I was 76. Perhaps they did. Perhaps I simply wasn't listening. Now, every morning, I place one hand over my heart before I stand up. Not to check if it hurts. To remind myself that silence is not proof that everything is fine. Our bodies rarely begin by shouting. They begin by clearing their throat. You may be telling yourself that you're too busy. That work cannot wait. That your family needs you earning another paycheck, finishing another project, fixing one more roof, painting one more room. I told myself those same things. The strange part is that none of those jobs remember my name now. The houses still stand. The roofs I repaired have been replaced by younger men. The customers forgot me years ago. But my daughter still remembers every appointment I cancelled. She remembers every phone call I answered with, "I'm fine." She remembers watching me grow weaker while I insisted I was growing stronger. That is the part your family carries. Not your toughness. Your absence. So let me ask you something. What unopened envelope is sitting somewhere in your life right now? Maybe it isn't made of paper. Maybe it's a phone call you've avoided. A test you've postponed. A pain you've explained away for the 100th time. Or maybe it's a single sentence you've been repeating to yourself, "I'll deal with it later." If that sentence sounds familiar, don't think about me. Think about the person who loves you enough to notice you've been breathing a little harder lately. They are hoping you choose differently than I did. Because the people who love you are not asking you to be fearless. They are asking you to stay. The kitchen drawer is different now. I repaired the broken runners, sanded the rough edges, and put everything back where it belonged. Everything except one thing: the envelope no longer hides beneath old bills and forgotten papers. It rests on top. Still torn. still yellow around the edges. Sometimes my granddaughter asks why I keep an empty envelope instead of throwing it away. I tell her it isn't empty. She smiles politely, the way young people do when they think old men are speaking in riddles. But it isn't a riddle. That envelope is full of 14 years I can never get back. It holds birthdays I attended while pretending I wasn't exhausted. Christmas dinners where I laughed louder than I felt. Conversations with my daughter where I said, "I'm fine," knowing I hadn't been fine for a very long time. It holds every tomorrow I believed was guaranteed. At 90, I've learned that the body is kinder than we deserve. It warns us. Again. And again. And again. The tragedy isn't that it eventually stops warning us. The tragedy is how often we stop listening first. Some mornings I stand in that same kitchen before the sun has fully risen. The house is quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock above the stove. I rest my fingers on the torn envelope not because I enjoy remembering, but because forgetting would cost too much. It reminds me that courage isn't opening an envelope after 14 years. Courage is opening it the day it arrives. So if you wake tomorrow and your body asks you a question, a pain that lingers, a breath that shortens, a heartbeat that feels different, don't answer it with another excuse. Answer it with action. Because one day, every sealed envelope becomes just paper. But time never does. Some things don't hurt because they arrive too soon. They hurt because we opened them too late.